Hey everybody, Invisiblekatana here with my review for episode 6 of The Last of Us, Ken. Now, of course, with this being tied to a video game, as I do with all my reviews, there will be spoilers in the second half, so you guys don't have to worry about any connections outside of just like, hey, emotionally, this thing happened this way or that. It'll be like very minute technical spoilers, but it won't be like, here's the ending of the game, which will also be the ending of the show. So I'll let you guys know when we get to spoilers because, especially in this episode in particular, I think it ties in the most with things that I do and don't like about the episode based on what they did and did not change from the game. So once we get to spoilers, I can like really deep dive into it, but just surface level stuff, non spoilers for the game and connections or anything like that. I did enjoy the episode, but there was a lot that kind of disappointed me, and it was 100% based on Joel's emotions in the episode. Acted incredibly well, especially the scene where he's just telling Tommy, what's going on and stuff, and he's crying and talking about like his age and the fear that he has, and like the scene with the dog and stuff. Incredibly well done. But also, he was a dick in this episode, and he can be a dick in the game for sure. Like that's kind of the whole point of his character. He kills innocent people. That's why Maria like does not like this dude, because it's her husband's older brother. And, it was like they did some effed up stuff. Like they straight up murdered innocent people, and they touch on that, which just like they do in the game, where it's like, this is stuff we did. And obviously one person is more okay with it than the other person. And it's always Joel that was just like, I did that for you. We had to get through this. We had to do that. And Tommy's like, look, we did it. We did have to. But that shit was crazy, and I don't like it. It weighs more on Tommy than it does on Joel. And I do like the way that they played that. I think it was maybe a little bit harsher in the game. Like there's just some bits of dialogue that are much harsher in the show than in the game, and then there's like small bits of dialogue that are a bit harsher in the game than in the show. But for sure, Tommy hitting him with like the whole kid thing and being like, just because your life stopped doesn't mean mine has to. That was harsh. But at the same time, Joel, when it's like, like I'm gonna be a dad, like he's his brother's trying to tell him like, I hope I'm gonna be a good dad, and Joel's like, I guess we'll see. He didn't do like the pat on the back and laughing like, I guess we'll see, baby brother. It was like, I guess we'll see. And it's like, Tommy had a right to be super pissed off about that, where it's like, what the F does that mean? Like that was a really effed up way to kind of do that. So I was like, all right, that's interesting. Also, this is technically, once again, a technical spoiler for the game because it's such a big difference that it's worth noting. Tommy does not have a kid in the game. So that was interesting. Also, they don't have Jackson in the game. That's actually from the second game, and they brought it into the first game to make things more cohesive, because in the first game, they technically have like a compound where they settled up and they're held up, but it makes so much sense to recontextualize the story and just be like, yep, he's already in Jackson, because it's not much of a difference outside of being like, hey, if we're going into the second game for season 2, then let's just already introduce Jackson. They even make some references and stuff here and there with certain things that show up. So I was like, oh, that's really cool. For anyone who's played the games, we saw those references, and it was like, hey, that's cool that they're teasing that stuff early, and they're kind of just implementing things early on because they didn't have Jackson in the first game. It was just like a different location. I think they were technically at the dam in the video game. That was where they were held up, and in this, it was like they go past the dam, and then that's it. They didn't show a crate either. That was like one of the biggest moments where it was like, Ellie can't swim and she has to hop on a crate. I was like, dang, just like a crate. Maybe there was a crate somewhere sticking a pallet or something leaning up against the wall and I didn't see it, but I'm like, dang, they didn't have that pallet reference. But I like how they handled it, where it was like, all right, we're officially just going to do Jackson right now instead of waiting and just be like, poof, they found a town. It was like, nope, the town's here. This is what it is. This is like, everything that is established, that is the antithesis of everything they've seen pretty much throughout the season. So I like the way that was handled. Going backwards to the very beginning of the episode, them kind of doing the 3 months later thing, I thought that was interesting. I was really shocked when they did that, and it was like 3 months later and I was like, holy crap, we're doing winter. So I'm very curious how that's going to play out, because I think we have 3 more episodes to go, and this episode was another one where I'm curious how people are going to feel about it, because a lot of people are like, episode 3, aside from the dumb issues they had, a lot of people had the legitimate concern of, that's a lot of time taken away from like Joel and Ellie and elements that are in the game. And that's what happened here, because they go through this moment and they of course start off with rabbits, which is just a reference to the game. I'll let you guys see exactly what the reference is if you eventually play the game, but they start off showing someone with rabbits, and it was like, all right, it's winter. Very interesting. And it turns out to just be like this older couple, Joel and Ellie are in there, and it was a really funny sequence where it's like they've just kind of been off the grid for a super long time, and they end up helping them out. It's like, hey, this is the river of death, be careful, do all this, you shouldn't go there anyway, but this is how it plays out. So they end up going across. They, of course, they pass the river of death, which is what they think. Amazing shot. That was probably my favorite shot in the whole show, is when they go across that bridge and it's just like a really, really big wide shot, and it's just snow. I love snow. Winter's my favorite season, like actual in real life. So it's not just in the game. It was just like, I just like winter, like just seeing snowfall. It was just like, I was watching it and I was legit just like, man, I've only been around mountains in my life because I'm from Michigan. I've been around mountains once, technically maybe twice, because I went to Japan. I could see Mount Fuji. The thing is effing huge. But as far as like actually being like, I can't see over there, it was like one time in my life, because I went to Nevada and I was like, dang, it's a wall. It's just rocks. It's mountains. I don't have that experience a lot. So I was watching this whole episode and they would just be filming something. And I would just look in the background. I'm like, mountains, that's crazy. Like they're just in a town and they just look over and you just can't see past this giant thing. It's just a rock. Like it's still crazy to me. Like that's what it's like. Like I haven't seen mountains enough. So when I see that, I'm just like, that's crazy. Like mountains are wild. So that was a weird moment I had, because I'm just like, it's so weird to me. It's still weird to me because that's just not something I'm used to in my life. But love the shot of that where they're going across the bridge. I thought it looked great. They get to Jackson, everything's cool. They got kids, they've got movie theaters, they've got all sorts of food and stuff. Everything seems pretty cool. They even seemingly talk about like, oh, like there's all these dead bodies and stuff like that. And they're like, yeah, well, sometimes there are, just warnings, things like that. And we'll see how that plays out a little further in the story. But I like what they did, but also they definitely spent a lot of time in Jackson. And then they still went to the school at the end. And I was genuinely shocked when it ended, or like when Jackson was done. And it was like, all right, they went through the whole beat with Joel and Ellie and them having the conversation in the bedroom and stuff, which I thought was super cool. And they, once again, something that they changed in that moment was they talk about how Ellie heard the conversation of Joel being like, like she's got to go. Like we have to go our separate ways and stuff like that. And in the game, Ellie actually takes off. She leaves, and that's how they end up in that room. Like that room is technically in a house that's somewhere else. And as you go through that sequence, it's Tommy and Joel. They go and they basically go get her, and you fight a couple bandits along the way, and then you get to her, and she's fine and safe, and she's just in the room. Exactly, like the sequence is like one for one. It was really good. And she's reading the book and stuff, and they have that conversation. And I was like, man, I felt like it hit so much harder in the game, because in that moment, he had already made the decision to let her go, but he literally goes out and kills more people just to get to her, because that's how worried he was. And I was like, I just kind of like that beat for it a little bit better than him talking to Tommy, where he's like, I'm old and I'm weak, and like I'm having these dreams and stuff. And like they do like the most TV stuff I think they've done in this, where he like sees someone that looks like his daughter, and he has the visions of her, like them putting up stuff on the Christmas tree and her just turning to look at him. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, because that's not in the game, where they don't show flashbacks and stuff. Obviously he thinks about his daughter, but they don't really touch on it too much, because that's kind of the whole point, which this episode introduces. It's exactly like the game. He does not tell her that he had a daughter at all. They do it differently though, which I thought was an amazing way to do it, because I think in the game it's kind of the same thing, where it's just like Maria's like, yeah, they're talking, and then it's like, oh, his daughter Sarah. But them doing it where Ellie was like, sorry you lost both your kids, and then she's like, well, it was just the one. Sarah was for Joel's daughter. And then she kind of pauses and it's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that. And I was like, oh, I felt like that was a really cool natural way to do it. I felt like it was more emotional, because I think when they were talking in the game, it was kind of just like conversation, just kind of going through the motions, and it was still emotional because she referenced Sarah. But I thought it was really cool in this one, where it was specifically like Ellie's like, sorry about your kids. And it's like, it was just the one. The others, obviously for Joel's daughter. And I was like, oh, like my bad, I didn't mean to throw that in there. So it was like this emotional beat that kind of just hit, and then they both kind of froze. Like obviously Ellie didn't know that, so she was stunned, and then Maria's like, ooh, he didn't say that. And they clearly, like, they know that they traveled really far, and it's like, oh, he didn't say that to her. Oops. That's my bad. So obviously that leads to that moment at the end where she references Sarah, and he tells her not to say anything. I do like the line from the game more, because he says, you're treading on some mighty thin ice. And I've always loved that line, because that's not something you hear very often. So I just like the way it was delivered in the game, because I think in the show, he just says, like, don't say another word or something like that. But I just always loved that line from the game, where it's like, you were treading on some mighty thin ice. And that was also like a very, like, because he's from Texas in the game, and it was like, that's definitely also a very southern thing to say, you're treading on some mighty thin ice. And I was just like, yeah, I just like how it fits better in the game. But I love the conversation and the way it was handled. But I was definitely like, I enjoy it, but I think I prefer the game the way it was done in the game a little bit more. And it's mostly due to the fact that I think, you know, it's because they kind of lean on the age thing, which is not as big of an element. I think they even reference it with him saying, like, if he was 5 years younger, he would have, like, destroyed that kid. I think that is the age gap between Joel in the game and Joel in the show, because I think he's in his late 40s. I think he's like 47 or something, and he's like 52 or something like that. I forgot the exact age that he said, but he said he was like 50 something when they were like going up the stairs. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, because they never really reference his age, but they do talk. It's somewhere in there where you can be like, this is his exact age. And he's definitely younger in the game, and it might only be like those 5 years. And I think that's a part of why they specifically went like 5 years, because I think that's his age in the game. So I love that. And I was like, okay, they're definitely playing more on him being an older character in this compared to what he is in the show, or what he is in the game. But I like the fact that they don't touch on that in the game. And I can't say why, because it would spoil the ending of the show, which I guess not really, considering the end of this episode. If you only watch the show, then, you know, it is what it is. But it was just a specific thing that happened in the game, and not touching on his age actually kind of helped a part of that for me personally, compared to them doing it now, where it's like, oh, you know, they kind of do that and then, you know, getting hit with the ending, which I imagine, I mean, I can only imagine what it's like not having expected that sequence at the end of this episode. And just being like, they go through this whole emotional thing, like, you know, she's better off without me and stuff, and they have this emotional fight and stuff, and then he's there in the morning, and it's like, you know, you deserve a choice, and she's like, you know, boom, they're together again. And it's like, okay, cool, that you went through that process. Like, if she wants to be with him, then he's going to be with her, and he's going to take her the whole way. That's the plan. And then, you know, they get to the end. They did have the monkeys. I was happy about that. I was like, I hope they got the monkeys at least. You know, they got the monkeys, so that was cool. They didn't do the upside down thing, because I was like, they could totally do the upside down deal and have him still like fall and get impaled that way. But they just did it in like the middle of a fight where he takes a dude out, he kills him like they do in the game, because if you do a stealth kill, that's the kill in the game. So I think that is our second official kill, the first being the bloater where he ripped the dude's head off, the guy who, Jeffrey Pierce, who was Tommy in the game. So ripped his head off, that was the video game kill. And then Joel in this gets the video game kill where he like chokes the dude and then snaps his neck. I was like, that's sick. And then I was like, oh no, he still got hurt, like they just did in a different way where he got stabbed. And then, you know, they're going along the trail, they do it just like the game, and they're trying, and then he just falls off the horse, and it's like, well, now she's alone. Well, I mean, she's got a horse, but you know, there's that. So that was, you know, I could only imagine people that didn't play the game were just like, so what next? Yeah, so there's that. But I love the way they ended it. You know, it was definitely one of those like, oh, okay, cool. You know, it was fast. You know, the school was still really fast. I wish we had a bit more action there. Or at the very least, that one battle between that argument or the conversation like in the room. I just wish there was another moment where he fought to get her and still decided like, all right, you're gone. Excuse me. I just kind of like that juxtaposition, because he still wanted her to be safe. And you see that when you play the game, where it's like he was about to pawn her off, but he's still like, all right, I'm going out to get her right now because I still want her to be safe. And in this, they don't really have that sort of like instant juxtaposition of him trying to give her up and instantly going to save her. And then they have that dark conversation, and then he's giving her up again right after. And I'd like that in the game. I think because it hits like instantly, it's just like 3 beats in a row where it's like, she's gone, I gotta save her, she's gone anyway. And in the game, it was just like, she's gone, you're gone. And then he changed his mind the next day, where he gives her the choice. So I thought it was a bit more hard hitting because of how it played out in the game, but still enjoyable. It was just like, I don't know if I like it as much. And some of the other specific stuff I'll get into spoilers with, but I think that's everything. At 21 minutes it should be, although I don't know, this might be 21 minutes long. I don't know, I probably cut some stuff, I might have started over, I don't remember. At this point though, full spoilers. So if you have not played the game, you shouldn't check this out, because I'm about to spoil some stuff, unless you don't care. But getting right into it, the main reason I didn't like Joel talking about how scared and weak and stuff that he was because at the end of the game, when he saves her, I thought that was actually like his weakest moment. And it makes sense when I explain it, because he went through this whole mission and it was like, hey, here's what's gonna happen, get to her, do all this stuff. The fireflies were 100% douchebags, because they're just like, well, we don't have the time, we can't explain it, she's going in, she might be dead, she'll definitely die, but we might get the cure. And that was his weakest moment, where it was like, he kills everybody. And then he lies to her at the end. And I was like, that in, you know, like I understand like that's a strong point for him because that's him protecting her. But at the same time, that is his weakest moment. For me personally, I think that is Joel's weakest moment throughout the whole series, was when he just goes on a rampage because it's like, I want her alive, period. I don't care what could happen or could not happen. She will live, and that's it. And that, technically speaking, it was a purely emotional moment, and it was a weak moment for his character. But I like the way it was handled because it was a weak moment as far as him doing that without thinking. But also, you know, that's when you get into the argument of they weren't thinking too well either, where it was just like, oh, we got to do it right now. We don't have a choice. All stupid. But I love that moment for his character and him saying that, or them not kind of touching on him, like feeling weak or anything like that, because he went through that and it was just like, boom. And in this, I get that that's what's going to lead to it, where it's like, he already talked about being weak and feeling like he already lost something. So it's like that super deep tie-in. And maybe it works more because obviously by the time you get to the end in the game, you've gone like through 10 hours of this stuff. With the show, it won't nearly be as much. So I think that's just how it has to play out, or at least that's how they felt it had to play out. But I was like, man, I don't feel like they have to do like Joel feeling like, you know, he's weak or anything like that, because he has that moment at the end. And I've always felt like, all right, I felt like it was like, it's a weird moment where it's like, that's kind of his weakest moment, but also like, you know, a really powerful moment as well. It's definitely a powerful moment, but it's also like a weird, I can't think of the word, a paradox. That's what I was trying to think. It's kind of a paradox because, like I said, I kind of think it's his weakest moment as far as like mentally and thinking about what should and should not be done. He goes backwards and it's just like, I'm just going to kill because she's mine now and I don't care. Like, that's my daughter now. And he just kills everybody. And it's like, there should have been more thinking on both sides, guaranteed. But he is the one that killed everybody and they didn't kill him. So it was kind of like, you know, that's kind of like his weakest moment realistically, was that when he did that and he took that away from her, which obviously they talk more about in part 2. But I love that ending and him being like, you know, I'm weak and I can't do this and stuff. Also, I didn't like as much because like that was kind of the whole point, was the reason I love that moment where in a sense that's his weakest moment is because throughout the rest of the game, he's beat after beat. Like, I'm hitting this person, I'm killing this person. We might still see that really dark moment. I think I mentioned this before with them being really buddy much earlier on, because another thing with this, when they're talking about sports and stuff, everything does feel super rushed because it's the exact same thing where it's like, I played it and it was like, oh, this just feels like they're just super happy all of a sudden. And it's weird to feel that because I'm like, I played the game and it felt like it took a million years before you get to like the college segment. And that's when they're like talking about sports. And that's the first time that happens, I think, in the game, is when you get there, because it is, I think it's right after Sam and Henry, and it's that time skip and they're instantly just making jokes and stuff. And it's like, oh, they've had time now. And it felt weird doing it in the show because it feels like it's only been like a minute and a half compared to how much time you play in the game. So watching it, he was just like, oh, this feels like really fast to me. But I think that's just like the curse of knowing the story from like the super long version. It's like knowing the version from the book where it's like, oh, they did all of this stuff, and then you see the movie, it's like, well, we got to cut all that crap out. We got like an hour and a half. Like, here it is, they're happy. So it feels weird having that experience, and I think that's just what kind of affects specifically this episode, because they felt super close. But it is the same thing. It's after Sam and Henry. They skipped 3 full months, so of course they're more buddy, but it just didn't really feel right. And I think it also may have been due to the fact that they did all of that stuff in one episode as well, where it's like, yeah, they're kind of buddy and stuff. They get to Tommy, and then it's like, I'm super weak and this and that, she has to go. They have the full argument and stuff, and it's like, yeah, we're going our separate ways. And then the very next day it's like, all right, it's cool, it's back to normal. And then, you know, technically they did skip, I think it was like 5 days at the end of the episode. They're like, yeah, it was like 5 super easy days. So they had even more time to kind of get back to being okay again. But it was just like, yeah, it felt really weird to have all of that in one episode. Like, they had the okay moment, then they had, you know, kind of the breakup moment where it's like they're splitting apart, and it's like, you know, you're not my daughter, I'm not your dad, like, this is it. And then the, you know, 5 minutes later, I can be your dad though. And it's like, you know, and it's just back to okay. And I was like, it felt so fast to me that kind of affected it. And then the fact that, you know, in the game they had a bit more time to kind of deal with that and stuff, and just going through the element of being weak versus not being weak is like, he's just tough. And then he has that weak moment at the end where it's like, he cannot let go of the fact that she'll be gone. And that's why that's his weakest moment, to me at least. And I was like, man, I feel like I wish they saved that, because that would have shown just how desperate he was to like avoid all reason and logic and debate and stuff. Although he does have a couple sentences, and like I said, easy argument. They were on some actual factual BS, being like, we just can't wake her up right now. So, you know, it's hard to really go into the actual details of the game, because even the Fireflies were being really stupid in that situation. And I think everyone has thought that since that game came out. It was just like, oh, just no choice, huh? Just no choice whatsoever. Knocked me unconscious when, you know, you could have gave me like a minute and a half to say, hold on a second, but they hit him in the head with the gun and knocked him unconscious. We just don't have time. We don't have time to talk. So you got to go. So that's on them. That's, you know, like when it comes down to it, the facts of that game was like, I kind of side with Joel. It was a harsh thing to do, but ultimately I side with him just because they were being dicks. It's not really the greatest way to choose something, but it's like, you know, hey, just saying. That's how they were. Maybe they'll be a little smarter in the show, and we'll see what happens there. But I'm excited for what comes next. I just think that them playing on him being old and being weak just kind of betrayed the character like just a little bit, because of how tough he is all the way up until the very end, where he's just pure emotion. And that's why I felt like that fit so well. But it's a show and not the game. You don't get the 10 hours. So I understand why it's a bit faster, and they could still do it. I never even got to the point I was going to say, but them getting to that super weak emotional point, we still have not seen David come in yet. And they kind of do it a little bit where they do the thing with the map where it's like, you know, you point to this and then the dude comes in. It's like, you point to the right part and it better be the same as your wife's. They got the dark moment. I don't know if he'll just straight up stab a dude right in his kneecap. Who knows? But they have to have that moment where people actually see it. They've been talking it up. They have not shown it yet. And that was that moment in the first game where Ellie's gone and he wakes up and he catches those two dudes and he stabs that guy in the leg. And it was like, I think he said one thing to him and the guy was like, whatever. And he was like, oh, okay. And boom, it was in the leg. And it was like, he killed both of them anyway. They gave him the answer, choked his buddy out, killed him. It was like, he was telling the truth. I know. Boom, everybody's dead. I was like, that was dark as F. And that was only 2 people. He's already killed more people than that. So it was like, we'll see. I think they have to have that moment because they've still only talked about it. So I think as far as like just the viewing audience, they are still building up his character as like a really good guy. And he's like, oh, he's emotional and he cares. That's his new daughter now. He's going to have that dark moment. He has to. And it's got to be, well, I guess not the next episode, because I think the next one is Left Behind. So the episode after next. So we'll see what happens. We didn't get the moment with Ellie where she gets the gun because they skipped to winter. So I was surprised about that. But depending on how they do Left Behind, unless it's the full-on flashback episode, which they could easily do, it could be like the DLC where you actually go kind of back and forth between the flashback and present time, where she's kind of strolling the mall. I would assume that they're just going to do full flashback and then just make it like maybe the last couple of minutes. I mean, they shrunk the entire college down to like 4 or 5 minutes long. They could easily just be like, all right, she went to the mall, she got like one thing and then got, you know, killed like one person, or she just saw some people and they maybe followed her or whatever. So it'll be interesting to see how they do that. But I think the end of the next episode is officially going to be like, yeah, she gets caught by David. So we'll see what happens. But this is definitely the one where I was like, I enjoyed it. But at the same time, I was just like, man, they didn't need to call him weak, because I felt like that kind of betrays his emotional state at the end of the game, personally. But it's a little different in the show. I still think it would have worked, though, even if they just did it with him being angry. But I think that's another thing. People said that a lot throughout the show, where it's like, they did have to kind of make him nice because you're not playing him. They did have to make him a lot nicer earlier on, because it's just like, well, we hate this dude. Like, he's killed innocent people over and over again. Like, they talk about that, but then it's like, you know, him kind of trying to make things better, you know, being with Ellie and stuff. But yeah, in the game you get more time with like the dark version of him just being like, don't talk to me, this is what happened, this is how it is. And then, you know, it takes a lot more time to get to the nice version. But they were like, look, episode 4, she talks about diarrhea, he laughed, it was a funny scene, they're starting to bond. They have to do it fast in the show because it's just not as much time, I understand, but it definitely feels weird seeing things so quick. And also really did need like more action in this episode. I felt like, once again, that's what made that beat hit a lot more to me personally. When they have that conversation in the house, it's after he was gonna leave her and then he takes off to get her back, and then it's like, yep, you're leaving again. That was like, you know, that was a very cool moment to me because of that juxtaposition where it's like, okay, is he changing his mind? He went out, you know, to get her because he cared so much, but then they have that deep conversation and it was still like, nah, you gotta go. Like, you have to go, it's too tough for me, but I'm not gonna say it's too tough, you just need to be gone. So the way they did in the game, I still felt like was a lot better, and it didn't have to come from him being weak. I felt like they kind of showed it, throughout the gameplay, and they could have had a smaller combat segment, but I still feel like it was better in the game just because of how up and down it went, where you're like, oh, well, once you go and rescue her, it's like, I got to get her back. All right, I've seen the error of my ways thinking to let you go. Well, let's get out of here together. And it's like, no, he was sure. He was like, look, I came out to get you, but you still leaving. Like, I'm not taking you all the way. So I like that a little bit more just because of like how hard hitting it was to think things are about to change really fast, and then they don't change, but then they do change right after. And in this, it was just faster, and I was just like, it just felt much simpler compared to how complex it felt in the game to me personally. But still enjoyed it. But I'm definitely hyped for what they do with this next one. They just keep ending it, and I'm so curious how many people don't realize Joel is actually going to be alive, because like the way they ended, it's just like, oh snap, they go through that whole thing. Great way to play it out. Honestly, that did add to the ending of him passing out, because obviously it was a much shorter amount of time, so you're still kind of with that whole conversation. By the time you get to the college in the game, you're already far away from the dam, because it's not Jackson in the game, but you're already away from that, and they've already had so much extra stuff and gameplay and everything that you're kind of away from those moments already. And shrinking it down definitely helped with that ending, where it was like they just went through that whole thing of him leaving her and needing her to be gone and feeling like he wasn't strong enough, and then being like, all right, I am strong enough if she believes I am, and then he dies, because that's definitely how they played it. Like, if you don't know, and I haven't watched the trailer, but I assume they're gonna instantly go to the left behind, and that's probably all you see in the trailer. So I'm curious how people are feeling if they don't know the game. You could easily look it up, but curious how people are feeling. This is a long one. I felt like there was a lot worth talking about, because it really was a lot of content, like, dialogue showing Jackson. Obviously that was Dina. We got Shimmer. That was great. It'll be sad later, but it's great for now. It's nice to see Shimmer. So that was really cool. But definitely did enjoy the episode, but at the same time I was also like, I'm not 100% happy about the changes. Also, Joel was definitely meaner in this than he was before. So it was interesting. I was like, I don't like how mean he was being to everybody in this, because it felt easier again in the game to get like more of an understanding where he's coming from. But him just being like straight up mad at Tommy for potentially being a dad was like, oh wow. This like I remember as I was watching it, haven't played the game in a super long time, I was like, it was a lot nicer in the game. They were like happy in the game, it felt. And it was, kind of weird because of the whole situation, but it was like, they were like happy and things were cool. And I was like, I don't like that they're just mad. And they kind of bugged me. I was just like, I wanted them to be just like, oh man, it's my brother, because that's how it was in the game. And I always liked that. And then it was just like, they were just angry. And I was like, I don't like that as much, but I'm sure I'll be fine with the rest of the show. We'd love to know your thoughts, so please put your comments down in the comment section below. Sorry this one was incredibly long. It was a very long video compared to what I normally do. But thanks for checking it out. I do stream, so if you guys are interested, you guys can check out my streaming channel. I stream on both Twitch and YouTube at the same time, so you can watch either one if you want to catch me live. All my like higher quality uploads are put on here, so if you just want to watch it in chunks and not catch me live, you can already check out some of the stuff I've done. My last game was Dead Space. Amazing game. Highly recommend you guys buy that. It's just so good. It's such a good remake of such a good game. Absolutely love it. So definitely check that out. Lots of great scares in that. But we'd love to know your thoughts on this episode. So please put your comments down in the comment section below. And of course, thanks for watching.